Okay, just give me a minute to figure this out. Hello, hello. I'm Pedro. I'm gonna be. Yeah. This is me. Official photo. I'm a technical artist working on liquid static. Um, also a VFX artist. Again, as the same title as technical artist. I didn't pick that myself. Someone just put that title on me, and I just went with it. Right? So today, my idea is to talk about Niagara and VFX in general. Again, I tried to make this really small talk, but for the life of me, I can't. So I made this longer than last time, but I'll try to rush it. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. I also have like a library of resources at the end with a page will have these slides and other notes. So if you're interested on this, you can take a look. Right? Cool. So the topics of this talk. I want to talk about why Niagara, the structures and workflow of Niagara, how you can get external data into it, Scratchpad, which is a bit more in detail of it, but I will try to cover, in a way that you can engage with it and then scale from there. Optimizing debug. This is just me calling out everyone else that uses Niagara, and please try to follow some of this stuff, hate seeing a no optimized VFX. And then resources at the end. Cool. So I want to start because when I was doing this talk, I was talking to someone that doesn't do VFX, and they were asking me, well, why Niagara? And my main point was like, there's actually no right way of approaching VFX. There's some best ways, there's some good ways, there's some bad ways, but you can do VFX multiple different ways, right? And Niagara is just one tool. People use Emberjam, Maya, Unity, Houdini, Blender. They use multiple tools. And when you're doing VFX, you're probably actually using those tools in conjunction with Niagara. So you kind of have to know your place within them, but you're not limited to any of them, right? VFX is very open. People have been doing for ages, since 2D before PC, so there's ways. And each software have their own benefit and their own drawback. You can see that like Emberjam is very powerful, easy to use. You can create this fire simulations, beautiful. But then that's it. That's fire. What about anything else, right? You have stuff like Houdini, which can do a lot of liquid stem or procedural meshes. But if you're trying to do a bunch of particles, you might actually get a bit stuck on there. Like Niagara might be better for you. And Niagara and Unreal in general can be scary, right? It's a lot of content at once. If you open it and you're not familiarized with it, you might be like, oh my god, this is way too much. I don't want to look at any of this. I just want to get something done. And this can be scary at first. We're going to talk about it. Cool. Now, I want to say why I like Niagara. This is kind of almost 50% copy from Niagara documentation that, honestly, I was a bit sad because 2 pages of Niagara documentation just came out as I was preparing for this talk, and I was like, come on, I was prepared for this. Anyway, the main thing of Niagara is that it's modular by design. The name module will come in later to explain that, but it's the fact that you can actually scale with Niagara. You can pick and choose, and you can have a list of effects that you want to see or different behaviors, and then you can tick off and tick on and see how that responds to your VFX system. So that's very powerful and very useful if you're just trying to learn or if you're just trying to get something done. The other big thing is the data-driven nature of Niagara, or their term, data encapsulation. Because Niagara was done with that in mind, you can get a lot of data inside Niagara. When I say data, I'm saying you can get textures, you can get your landscape mesh, you can get your skeleton meshes, you can get your static meshes, you can get vector fields, and a huge list of stuff, right? But it makes your life easier to do that and easy to comprehend where they are putting that data into your system and how you're using it. And that it scales with you, right? You can start simple and start building on that knowledge. And you can start with a simple VFX that they already give you a template. And then it's like, okay, what if I add some vector noise here? And you can see how that will affect your particle system. Cool. Now I'll go a bit more in depth into that. For those that already know Niagara, this might not be nothing new here. But I think it's important to explain essentially the layout of Niagara and how each thing act with each other. So you have the system that will, have all your emitters within, and inside your emitters, you're gonna have the stages of each emitter, right? So each stage, and then inside each stage, you're gonna have each module, right? It's important to comprehend that like Niagara works very much from that top-down kind of deal. So it's like on the top, you're gonna have your emitter properties, which like holds all your particle properties, and then as you go down, you're gonna get to your particle properties, right? Okay, it's hard to imagine that here, but I think I have a better slide to showcase that. Cool. Actually, I'm gonna jump ahead to show that. Cool. So as an example, you can see that the blue box is the whole system, and the system have the smoke, the flames, and the ember of this very simple bonfire effect, right? The flames are continuous, but they stop before the rest of the other particles stop. So the emitter lifetime stops before the smoke or the embers stop. So they always inside the system, but they have different durations and different starting areas. And then you have the particles within those emitters that, in this case, for the embers or the smoke, the emitter itself stops working, but the particles keep going until they die by themselves. So again, you see the system lifetime, the emitter lifetime, and the particle lifetime, and how they kind of work together to make that effect, right? You can think of as your system as that thing that holds everything within, and then each emitter holds a specific effect within, and then your particles are just your cards or your meshes that you spawn inside of it. Emitter is defined on the emitter update or the emitter state, right? As you can see, top down, right? And the particle is defined on the initialized particle and particle spawn and particle update. So it's very much that thing of like, okay, this is my system, emitter, particle. Cool. Now I'll go back to it because Unreal presents a lot of different namespaces, what they're called. So when you're writing variables to your particle, like I'm writing to the particle position, you're writing to the particle space, right? If you're writing to your emitter position, you're writing to the emitter space. But then they offer you the stack context or the transient spaces, and you're like, what? They offer you a very custom way of using or writing values to your system, and to your particles or to your emitters, right? So stack context, as you can imagine, is dependently on where you put it, it's going to be on that namespace. So if I put my stack context variable on the emitter summary or the emitter update, it's going to be a emitter namespace. And if you put it on the particle area, it's going to be a particle namespace. So it's something that you can change it depending where you're putting it. So it's really easy to like adapt. If you're creating a different module and you want them to be able to work on these different spaces, you might want to use stack context. And then you have transient, which gets a bit more complex. Again, knowing now that emitters have their own lifetime and particles have their own lifetime separately from each other, transient space would be something that you could write to one of these spaces, like let's say particle, and you still can read it from your emitter namespace, and vice versa, right? So normally, variables that are, again, top down, variables that are written on particle, you write the particle, but you can read from all these variables. You can read from your emitter, you can read from your engine, you can read from your system. But then you go to the emitter, you go up a level, and you don't have access to particles anymore, right? And you go up a level again, and you don't have access to your emitter anymore. The transient space makes so you can read at any stage, but it's also discarded when that stage is done. So you can read within anywhere on a emitter, but emitter space is done, that space is done. If you write it to a particle, you can read from any particle space is done, that is done as well, right? So it's a bit hard to explain without depth examples, but it's very useful to know that it exists if you want to do something a bit more complex than just the basic particle emitter or system. Now I want to talk about these three specifics on the bottom here: the engine, and the user, and the NPC. Those are very specific ways of adding data to your Niagara system. Your engine are basic information that the engine provides to Niagara, so you can get the position of your system, you can get the scale of your system, and that's when you're putting your system on the world and you have the gizmo, you can get that information through the engine space. And then you have the most common user space, which is how you input custom data into your system. Like normally these are essentially exposed variables that you would have to control specific details of your particle system. And those can be accessed basically anywhere, as you can see, right? And then you have the NPC, which there's a better example later on, so I'm going to jump forward a bit now. Cool. So this is an example of how to use the user space to modify your particles. So again, I try to keep the VFXs very simple so we can just understand how they are being used. So in this case, I just exposed the color, the intensity, the light, the wind speed, right? And you can see that the color is being, used in every emitter that I have attached. So the embers, the fire, the smoke, the wind speed is also controlling that. So on this example of the color, I'm just multiplying that value by a scale, so you can fade off naturally, but that input data still comes from the user outside of the system. So if someone was to drag that bonfire anywhere on the level, they could come in and change the color of the fire, how intense it is, how big it is, and it would change everything dynamically for them, right? Cool. Now, going back to Niagara parameter collections. This is one of my favorites. It's really weird, the setup, but some of you might know material parameter collections. So material parameter collections is the way you basically would control a bunch of materials with a single data source, right? Material parameter collections can be written to a Niagara parameter collection, which does this basically the same thing. So on this example, I'm controlling the rain intensity through a material parameter collection that's then affecting how many droplets of water is falling from the sky, right? But not only that, that same MPC, so the same material parameter collection is controlling how dark the environment is because it's controlling the materials, right? So I wanted to do something that will define how wet the materials are, right? And I can use that same value to define how intense the rain is. So this is how essentially you would use the Niagara parameter collection to centralize all your data into one spot. Cool. Now a bit about the engine. As I explained, there's a limited list of what you can access, but one example that is actually asked by Kieran to showcase was using the scale of the object to define the scale of your particles. So like if you ever use Niagara, you know that by default, if you have a VFX and you scale it up, it will look weird, right? It will, I don't know, the particles area will spawn a huge area or the particles will be too small. So this is a a good way to like read that properly directly and define how your system is interpreting, is responding to that data, right? And the other example that I really like, and that's goes more into optimization, but can be used for other things. And I'm sorry for this bad example. For some reason, it didn't get to blue on the GIF. It was blue on my end, I promise. But you can use the LOD distance fraction, which is an engine parameter, to read the distance that the VFX have from the camera. This way you could essentially change how the VFX look at the distance and create a LOD, or you can change the color to a intense brighter color, so you can make that be more visible at distance, and many other things. This is just a simple example, but now this exists. And if you look at the tab on the engine variables, you can see a list of them that you can use. Okay, now we're going to go into a bit more advanced use. And on those examples, I might not have like essentially the code or the setup, but those will be on the resources later. One of the few things that Unreal 5 added recently was camera queries. So you can actually access your camera details based on your player camera. This doesn't look like anything, but essentially this system, it's placed somewhere in the world. It doesn't matter where. It's falling. It could be rain, it could be snow. But it's spawning from the player camera, despite the system itself being anywhere else, right? And the way you do this is essentially by defining the origin of your particle spawn to be the camera position, which is external data that Unreal now allows you to access. And this example I really want to bring because, well, I guess a lot of people played few recent games that use VFX like this. I'm thinking Death Stranding used that. The Expedition 33, obviously. So I wanted to do like an example similar to that. And this is actually a very simple setup. I think I have a breakdown of this one, so I'll go through to explain a bit more in depth. This one is a custom scratch pad, which will go into more like details, complexity. But the simple idea here is that I am reading my skeleton mesh data and noting down where the vertex position is and spawning particles from there. Cool. That's initial. I can spawn a bunch of particles around the skeleton mesh. Cool. Then I am taking that same triangle data, writing to the UV space of that mesh, and putting a texture over that UV space. So this way I can dissolve holes throughout my mesh instead of just dissolving my mesh equally, right? So I'm reading skeleton mesh, I'm reading texture, and this calculation is the same that I would have on a dissolve shader. It looks complex, but it could be very simple if you want it to be. And the actual important thing is just these two nodes here. Those are where you sample the texture with the UV that you brought up with the skeleton mesh. And then you can output the location and if the particle should spawn or not by the end of that scratch pad. And there you go. Everything else on that system actually don't matter, like noise that you can play around with, gravity, sure, but to get that effect going, you just would need to build this custom scratch pad. And another example that I guess merged all of that is this version, which is more based on space, and I'm just reading the position of a sphere on the world and writing to the MPC, right? So material parameter collection now together with the new skeleton and texture, and I can make so it fades if you go out of bounds, right? I think I'm already almost done. Cool. Optimization. I want to talk about this, and I know it's boring. So I actually prepared like a whole document for whoever is interested to look up and see the details of all of this. But I wanted to go over some really specific things. I will try to be quick on them because I have, I think, 3 pages on optimization. The first thing to be aware of when you're doing Niagara is to look at your emitter properties. Yes, if anyone played with Niagara, you've seen that the top thing that it shows you is like, oh, locus space, determinism, interpolated spawning, and you're looking at what is that? And you read you hover over the mouse and you read what it is and you don't understand anyway. So I'm trying to give you like just a highlight on how I use those and how I try to understand them. Of course, I probably wrong, but not fully wrong, and you probably should look into it yourself. But it's already a baseline for you to go forward and start using those options, right? So locus space is a bit obvious. It's like you either own world space or you're attached to that system. So like if you have a bonfire and you have a card and you move that system, the card will be left behind. But if you use locus space, the card will come with you. That's the base concept of it. Determinism is also a good one to know about optimization specifically, because in essence, everything you do in Niagara will be random to some extent, right? When you apply noise, it will write to a random value, or you have it will look different every time, at least normally, right? If you just check that button, it will always be the same. It will pick a path on the many alternatives that you laid out for your system, and will pick a path that will be followed every time. And that's great for optimization, because then I don't need to randomize those numbers every time. Of course, you need to be careful when to use them, because, well, you might not want your explosion to looking the same 100 times ever, right? So, but it's good to know. Interpolate spawning, it's way more complex than this. But the easy way to get it is that if you toggle that option, it will spawn better. It will be smoother. You can spawn more particles, and they're not going to glitch out, and you can spawn on fast running emitters, and they're not going to look too bad. That's the basic concept. Please look it up, but it's essentially like, do I want that option always on? Probably not. Right? If you have, like, again, bonfire system and it's a static bonfire, you don't need to make sure that it's spawning perfectly every time, right? Because you're not going to see how the particles are spawning most of the time. So you can toggle that option off. But again, experiment with them, right? Then you have the scene target, you have GPU or CPU. I guess rule of thumb is that GPU particles will be cheaper, but also will run, or better saying, they will behave worse. So depending on how your behavior is, you might actually need access to your CPU to make more, to make better calculations. But if you don't need to do those calculations, you probably can leave your particles on the GPU. The other thing to keep in mind is that a common bug that I found many times is that when a developer look at the VFX and like, why is it my VFX looking very different when I have a low frame rate? Like, well, you're running on a GPU. It's good. Your frame rate will influence how your particle is running. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, rule of thumb, GPU will be cheaper, right? And then you have fixed bounds, and just say one thing, try to use it as much as possible, fixed bounds. The only cases that I found that you really don't want to use it is when your particles are traveling really fast, right? Or when your system are traveling really fast, like you have a tail of a sword. Even then, maybe you want to do a bigger fixed bound. But if it's traveling around the map, like a turbine or something, maybe use dynamic. But the way to think about this is like where your particles are contained. So it's a big box around your system. I have another picture of that I'll show later. Anyway, and it's defined if your particles are within that space, you're going to render properly, you're going to run properly. If they are out of that space, it's going to either cull or it's gonna start glitching out. And that's another common issue. A lot of developers will find that for some reason when they turn the camera, their bonfire starts flickering on their left side. And that's because your bounds are limited to that space. And when you turn your camera, you're not looking at the bounds anymore. So your system was like, oh, I'm about to be called, so I'm just going to stop working properly. So this is something to keep in mind. Require persistent IDs. This is something that I love about Niagara is that normally when you need that, Niagara will tell you. It will appear options like, oh, you want to toggle that option, right? You should do it because that's when they actually require a specific number attached to your particle to do a specific action. But most of the time, you don't need to have it on. It's extra information that you might not actually need. And max GPU particles to spawn, quite obvious, GPU particles can spawn a lot of particles, but probably not like 10 million, Like, that's it. Define a number that's not too high, but high enough. And I'm actually not going to go through the other ones. Those are more specific. You might want to take a look at yourself, but for the first ones, please start using them. I'll go quickly through effect types. That's the other thing that I always recommend people to do. Effect types are, well, it's how you essentially condense a bunch of settings for optimization into a file that can be used on different systems. I think that's the easiest way to see. You can override those settings parameter, but they have a lot of options that can easily make your particles optimized. You can have a list of these effect types that you just use for your whole game and you don't care about anything else. If you just use that, you at least have some optimization, which is great, right? So something to keep in mind. And I wanted to point out those 6 options there. You have the update frequency is like at what rate you want the engine to check for if it's supposed to be called, if it's not supposed to be called, or if it's supposed to apply the different distances. The reactions, like what happens when they are actually supposed to be called, like they're supposed to stop, or they're supposed to continue and die when the particle die, etc. And then the settings that you can pick your quality level of your projects, like, oh, at low and medium, I actually want my max distance to be just 5,000 units in front of me, but on high and epic, I actually want them to be the double of that, because the computer is going to be more powerful to run that, so, please push that forward. And there's a lot more options, but those are essentially the essentials. Two more slides. Cool. The bug HUD is the other thing that I'm surprised a lot of people don't know about it, but it's literally like a button on top when you have the Niagara system open, and you have so many options that you can visualize and debug your particles. Like, if you work with Niagara, you probably have moments where you have everything right, but where is my particle spawning? You don't know. And then you use that to kind of recognize and find that. And you can show different attributes of the system, of the emitter, of the particle, the bounds, and how the system they're running on their own. I'm going to skip this one. Really interesting case scenario that I used, but Niagara have a baker now for their fluid sims. You can actually use that baker for something else. Like, you create a particle system that looks very awesome with like a bunch of particles. Why not bake it down into one spreadsheet, right? That way you can turn this nightmare into this, right? Cool. And this is the goodie bag. Anyone wants to scan the QR code, or there's the website. This also includes my previous talks on tool development, and a lot of people asked about resources on that. So there will be there's like actually code snippets for custom tools if you are interested in that. And for this talk, there are also code snippets for the VFX that I did. So if you want to do the solve effect, they will be there. Cool. You have time for questions? No. I'm sorry. If you want to chat, come talk to me outside. I'm actually on the booth for Night Plane. If you want to turn yourself into an NPC, come around. Thank you.